Well, thank you, Eddie, for joining us today. So I just had a couple quick questions that I know we get these questions a lot of times from different homeowners about their HVAC system. And typically the way, like if I'm going to show a house, a lot of times what I'll do, or I'll tell, a potential homeowner, especially a first-time home buyer, some of the major systems to be, curious about or cautious about is, of course, your roof, septic systems, and then your HVAC system. I mean, those are really the three largest expenses that I think about when I'm showing a house or looking at that. So a question that I have that I get all the time is, what's the best way to prevent an HVAC system, a heating and cooling system, from failing?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that your heating and air conditioning is the most valuable appliance in the house, so you certainly want to protect it. You want to extend its life as much as possible. And the easiest and simplest way to do that, it's so easy and simple that oftentimes it's overlooked, but that's replacing it with a good air filter.
Okay.
And replacing it routinely.
Okay.
So I always recommend buying a pleated air filter, but generally you want to buy a cheaper pleated air filter. Filtrete makes great air filters, but when you're buying a new home, you don't always know that the duct was designed to handle some of these highly efficient air filters. So err on the side of caution, buy a pleated filter, one that's not going to break the bank, and that's going to be the best way of trying to extend the life of that AC system.
Okay. So when you say a pleated filter, what exactly is that?
So a pleated air filter is going to have that accordion look to it. It's just going to kind of zigzag up and down.
Gotcha. Okay. So those are almost, I guess I would call them like a box filter almost. Most of them are like a little bit square. They're
going to be in a box cartridge.
Okay.
Yep. They're going to be rectangular. Some may be square.
Okay. How often should those filters get replaced? Or is it about the same amount of time?
So air filter replacement is subjective. Some people have really clean houses, or maybe it's a large house and one occupant, so they're not going to generate a whole lot of dust.
Sure.
And then you have people like me. I have 3 kids. They're in and out.
Sure.
They like to play in the woods. And then to really top it off, I've got 2 dogs and a cat. So for someone like myself, you're probably going to want to replace them once a month.
Okay.
But there are other people who don't generate a whole lot of dust. They're that single occupant in a home, no pets. They could probably push it every 3 months.
Okay.
And then there's also different filters too, and every filter has its own standard. We like to install, when installing new equipment, very, very deep filters that are going to be installed right at the indoor equipment. They're generally 5 inches thick.
Okay.
They're going to have a lot of surface area, so they're going to last a lot longer.
Gotcha.
Generally 6 months to a year.
Okay. So to kind of maintain, or to extend the life, one of the simplest, easiest ways of doing that is making sure that the air filter is being replaced, or you're monitoring and making sure that's clean, more often than not.
Yeah, the air filter is king. I mean, as long as you can maintain clean air going into that system is going to be well maintained. It's going to be spotless. When we come out to do a routine maintenance, it's very noticeable.
Okay.
It minimizes what we need to do, but it also minimizes the impact on the equipment. A heavily soiled air handler is going to affect not only the efficiency of the machine, as it's slowing the amount of air that's flowing across it, it's also reducing its ability to transfer heat across that coil. It's reducing the airflow volume itself, because the blower motor gets bogged down with a weighted blower wheel, as well as it being restricted at the coil. It's also going to create funky odors. There's a whole lot that kind of goes along with it.
I know sometimes, so when I go and I'm showing a house, for one of my buyer clients, one of the things that I look at very often is I go to the air registers, or I'll go to, the intake, and I will look at that filter to see if they are maintaining them. Because to me, if somebody is maintaining the filter, right, like you said, even if you are getting, a $10 filter, $4, $5 filter or something, doing that on a regular maintenance or regular cycle shows to me that somebody is taking pride in their ownership, or they really have understood the importance of that. But I mean, I've gone into houses where literally the filter is caving in or whatever. I mean, it is so, the poor HVAC system is literally gasping for air trying to do that, where some I'll even get into and I'll see it, I'll listen, and you can almost hear a whistle, or you can hear the sound has changed or whatever, because it just there's no way to bring in that sucking of the air. So that's crazy. So
yeah, so that's one of the first things we look at as well.
Okay.
Is just to see if it is something that's routinely replaced, because it does have a dramatic effect on the system. It's just like when you go car shopping and you're going to buy a car off at the side of the road just because it fits your budget better. You know, you're going to look at the engine oil to make sure that it's not, dark black and
Sure.
smells burnt.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing there, especially if a new homeowner is going to walk through a house, tour it. They're going to want to make sure that it's clean. So just make sure it's clean. Make sure the grill is also vacuumed routinely. Nobody really likes to see that appearance.
Sure.
Now, as far as duct noises go and things like that, sometimes that can also be related to just a poor installation, poor design at the time of installation, which is another good reason to use a reputable heating and air conditioning contractor who really understands the scientific fundamentals of heating and cooling.
Sure. I guess we all know a guy, right? So
we
hear that very often, like, oh, yeah, I'll get my buddy or I'll get so-and-so to
sometimes that's what keeps us in business.
Sure. No, I can appreciate that. So the filter, no-brainer, replace that as much as you can. If you can get one of these, I would say, upgraded filters installed, or if you have one of those filters, making sure that that's being done. Lots of options to do that, but probably the easiest way, kind of like what you said, I think that's like a perfect analogy, is change the oil. Make sure you're releasing, changing the oil. But when it comes to the next phase of this, of keeping that HVAC system, because a well-maintained system, a nice system, or a higher quality brand. I know you guys install Lennox units. Yep, mostly. So having a reputable system, something that is of quality, make sure you're maintaining it. What exactly goes into, because we see this all the time. A lot of, HVAC companies, they'll promote different specials or things like that on maintaining it. But what actually goes into maintaining a system fully? What does that look like?
Yeah, so ultimately when we go out and maintain a system, we just want to make sure it isn't going to break down for that duration of the season, which is ideally why we would like to go out there twice a year. I'd say the minimum is once a year, have your system maintained, but ideally twice a year. That way we can see the system operate in heating, and we can see it operate in cooling.
Okay.
But when we go out there, we're going to make sure that, for one, the air filter's clean, right?
Sure.
We're also going to make sure that the air filter was effective.
Okay.
We want to make sure that the coil is clean.
Okay.
The air filter is going to be a direct reflection of that. If you're using a cheap air filter, odds are the coil is going to load up with some dust and debris. Sometimes there are just duct leaks. There's air being pulled in from places that you're unaware of, and that's going to adversely affect the coil condition itself. And then from the coil condition, after we chemically clean the coil, and it doesn't always take chemicals. If it's well maintained, we've been out there every 6 months. Generally, we can rinse the coil with something that we call a coil brightener. Coil brightener is just going to strip the oxidization off, so it doesn't inhibit heat transfer. We then check the condensate drain. The condensate drain is the number one cause of property damage in a home related to heating and air conditioning. So that's something that we check routinely. It's something that really should be checked routinely, and oftentimes becomes oversight. So we make sure that is flowing well. What we do typically with a drain line is we will blow it out if we think it's necessary. We like to use clear traps in our condensation line so we can see what kind of sediment forms in the drain line itself, again, which is a direct reflection of the air filter. If the air filter is allowing a lot of dirt and debris to get to the coil, it eventually washes into the drain, as you could imagine. So the clear condensate trap helps us identify the load inside that drain line, and it also helps collect and capture some of that. So we'll sweep it out with a brush. From there, we'll flush chemicals through it to kind of eliminate some of that. Because there's not a high current of water flow moving through the drain line, we'll also get mold, like a slime that'll form in there. So the chemicals kind of help keep that away too. From there, we look at all the electrical components to make sure that they're functioning properly. The biggest thing there, though, is to make sure that the electrical connections haven't faded and burnt away. In fact, I just went out to a house right before Christmas. It might have even been Christmas Eve. And their heat pump had quit working. So we go out there, we look at the heat pump, replace the contactor, the heat pump came on. But I scratched my head and wondered why the electric heat wasn't maintaining temperature, at least to some degree. It was 50-some degrees when I walked into the house. So I go down to the air handler to inspect the electric heat. I was thinking that maybe it was just miswired, but she had 3 heat banks inside this air handler, and every single one of them had a wiring deficiency where the terminals had burnt off, the wire had melted, heat relay had failed. So we go out there and make sure that stuff isn't going to happen.
Okay.
Additionally, we check the blower wheel.
Okay.
Because the blower wheel will also collect dust if it makes it past the coil,
Okay.
and then into the blower. As you could imagine, it's gonna become a component of the air dynamically. So we'll pull the blower wheel out, we'll clean that, put it back, things like that. And then of course we check everything outside to make sure that it's functioning the way it's supposed to. Electrical components, the fan, the coil, the whole 9 yards.
Okay. So it sounds like when you all are going out to do a maintenance or service, you're really looking for more preventative issues, not necessarily things that are going wrong with the unit now, but as much as like trying to prevent from you having to do a service call later.
Yeah, when HomeTeam comes out there, it's a comprehensive maintenance in which we hope to save you the pain of going without heat or air conditioning.
Sure.
There's always anomalies to this. There are things that we cannot predict.
Sure.
When we're looking at electrical motors, there aren't always indicators to show that they're going to fail. But we're going to do our best effort to identify what we can control and correct them because we don't want downtime.
Sure.
We don't want to fill our schedule with callbacks
Sure.
where we're not making any money.
Yeah.
We want to focus on those that don't have heat, go out there and fix those. So when we're given the opportunity to go out and do a maintenance, it's going to be comprehensive. It is not a low introductory, let me get my foot in the door and then I'm going to sell you on hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars of things that you don't need. It is strictly a maintenance.
So it's more or less, it's kind of like a report card for your unit, where it's at today, trying to prevent it, trying to keep it lasting as long as it possibly can or whatever, but then also providing the homeowner you're really like a report card of where they are today and where they need to go or what they need to be prepared for in the future. I mean, is that fair to say? Yep. So that's good. So shifting gears, so we understand to keep your unit lasting longer, got to change the air, change the air filter, stay on top of that, maintain it, making sure a professional is going out, really understanding what's going on with the unit, keeping it as long. But let's say somebody is getting to a point, and we see this with HVAC heating and air units. We also see this with like hot water heaters, where they may be functioning today, but we also realize that technology changes, right? The car from 10 or 15 years ago is not the same car that you can go buy today. It's got different features, it's more efficient, more effective. So I'm assuming that it's probably the same with heating and air too. I mean, I'm sure, because that's the other thing too. I mean, you said it earlier, but I think that's definitely good to note is that yes, it's keeping you cool, it's keeping you comfort inside your home, but it's also impacting your cost every month when it comes to your electricity bill too. So I'm assuming that every unit is, if a unit is more efficient, I'm assuming that it's going to have like a lower cost every month when you're talking about your electric bill too. Is that right?
Yeah, the most expensive thing to operate in your home is your heating and air conditioning, hands down. So it's going to increase fuel costs.
Okay.
If it's running inefficiently, it's going to increase electrical costs. If it's operating inefficiently, and that is one of the biggest game changers of having a maintenance agreement. We go out there and we verify that it is operating efficiently. It can operate and it can keep you comfortable, but it could also do that inefficiently. And we see this a lot during the heating season. What oftentimes happens in the heating season when it comes to failures and high electric bills is the heat pump fails. The customer doesn't necessarily realize that the heat pump failed because the auxiliary heat, those electric heaters that they put in there to supplement the heat pump when it gets really cold, then takes over and provides all the heat that you need. So you run a couple months of pure electric heat with no idea that the heat pump has failed until that electric bill comes in and it's $1,000 or greater. This happens a lot, and of course we feel bad for the customer who then has to fork this bill, but again, this is a good reason to have a maintenance agreement so we can verify that the heat pump is in fact operating properly. Also another good reason to use a reputable heating and air conditioning provider who can install a system that maybe will give you an alert that, hey, the heat pump isn't working, get this thing serviced. Sure.
No, and we see that a lot too, especially for like replacement units where, a heating and air company or somebody on the side or somebody will go out and make a replacement and it's either oversized, undersized, the ductwork's a mess, whatever it may be.
So really, I mean, for a few $100s to have a reputable company go out and really truly maintain the system, maintenance the system, service the system, I mean, would it be fair to say that they should probably very likely, and especially if they're changing the filter as needed, you know, and they're staying up on top of it, they should probably see whatever expense going into that system, they will probably very likely see the savings throughout the year because the unit's actually working the way it's intended to work. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So the Department of Energy has changed energy efficiency standards two, maybe even threefold over the last decade to 2 decades. When I first got into the trade, there were very few energy standards that really had to be met.
Sure.
But now that you know we're into 2025, they've increased. In fact, they've just changed the metrics, the way that they measure energy efficiency, just a couple years ago, and they've also moved the goalposts as they've been doing quite a bit over the last few years. So when you make a equipment change, when you remove the old stuff and you put new stuff in, generally the energy savings are dramatic. I pulled out an old 1990s Coleman unit out of my own home and put in a Lennox mid-tier. It wasn't high-end, real efficient equipment. At the time, I didn't have the money for that. Yeah. I just put in something that was very basic, but reputable, reliable, all that good stuff. And my electric bill has dropped more than $100.
Wow.
Every month. Yeah, it was significant.
Sure. And if you do that over, let's say, 10 years, 15, 20 years of a life of, you know, the HVAC system, I mean, you're talking about significant money. That almost, you know, I don't want to say pays for the unit, but, you know, in some theory, I mean, again, it's a, you know, you got to look at this as an investment. I mean, you are investing into your home. You're investing into your largest investment that most people will ever make in their lives or whatever. So
I guess you could say there was some ROI because it's cheaper than keeping the system that you had there.
Sure.
You know, so, you know, maybe it washes out in the end. But yeah, it is kind of hard to see an ROI when replacing the equipment. But hey, it freed up $100 in our cash flow. So there are benefits.
No, absolutely. And it certainly... It certainly was much cheaper than having to, you know, have your wife on either a cold night, you know, the HVAC system going out or whatever, or a hot day or whatever, and then all of a sudden the air conditioner not working. So I'm sure it probably saved some time on your life too.
Maybe, yeah. My hairline doesn't show it, but
that's good. So okay. So I know that you had shared previously about some different changes within the industry that were coming on the heat and air front. You want to speak a little bit about like some of the different, like, I guess, changes? I think refrigerant is changing. Is that right? Are they changing to a new, I guess, you know, fluid or new liquid that's going into these units?
Yep. So the industry has evolved quite a bit over the 20 years that I've been in the trade.
Sure.
But most recently, we are seeing a transition into refrigerants that have less of a global warmth impact on the environment. These are classified as A2L refrigerants, so they're mildly flammable refrigerants that we're using in equipment that is manufactured in 2025. So when you're buying a new system today, it is going to have a new refrigerant type. These refrigerants are R32, R454B. Those are the only two on the market now, but I'm sure that there may be others that are included. They do create some complexity or added complexity to the installation of a system, the manufacturing of a system, and the whole sales process because they are mildly flammable. There are other safety measures that have to be added to the system. Again, another good reason to use a reputable heating and air conditioning contractor that understands these safety protocols that need to be put in place to protect your home.
Sure. No, and I know that the automotive world saw some of these changes, and it sounds like now the heating and air has kind of followed suit with more of a flammable based, but there's less refrigerant that's actually going in the system than previously. Is that right?
Not entirely.
Okay.
There are limitations to how much refrigerant can go inside of a house, so it's based on the square footage of the house.
Okay.
But realistically, they're using the same amount of refrigerant. Okay. But don't be alarmed. By the flammable classification. Sure. It has a very low ignition velocity rate, meaning that it has to leak out really, really, really slow.
Sure.
And then it has to be in contact with an ignition source to light.
Sure.
But it's not going to explode. It's not going to combust. And it's not a huge volume of refrigerant that goes into these systems.
Sure.
So we don't see it as a real big safety concern. I would see it as a greater safety concern in vehicles.
Yeah.
because the condenser in a vehicle and the liquid receivers in the front end of the vehicle, during an impact, you're going to have all of this. You're going to have refrigerant that's leaking. You're likely going to have sparks flying. And we don't see fires. We don't see explosions as a result of these refrigerants. They've transitioned to this HFO style refrigerant 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years ago.
Sure.
And it was well received. I mean, they don't have much issues.
No, exactly. So somebody, let's say they've purchased a house recently, or maybe they've been in their house, for a while, and they realize that their system is getting towards the end of life, right? So they realize they've started budgeting. They realize that, hey, eventually our system's been good to us, but eventually it's going to go away. What are some of the things that somebody that's looking to replace or upgrade their heating and air system, what are some of the things that they should be looking for?
So the number one thing that a homeowner can do when looking for heating and air conditioning is finding a reputable heating and air conditioning provider.
Okay.
If you can find someone who can be trusted, who has the training,
sure,
who takes pride in their work, who's a craftsman essentially in heating and air conditioning, that means the most.
Okay.
They could put in bottom barrel equipment and probably still get a good end result.
Sure.
These are people that are going to put in the time and effort to ensure that the ductwork is sized properly, to make sure that when the new equipment goes in, the ductwork's sealed correctly.
Sure.
They're going to give you the best advice on replacing refrigerant lines. They're going to give you the best advice on the equipment to be installed. Because it is very application specific. This is the big difference with heating and air conditioning than the rest of the appliance world, is that we have to use some fundamental science to apply specific product to your application. It's not a one unit fits all kind of industry. We have to know exactly what's going to fit, the way it's going to perform, the way it's going to integrate with the duct system, and then what kind of negative byproduct we might have by applying this incorrectly. And then we have to judge all that and then give you the best options moving forward.
Okay, that's great. So for anybody that's in a home, they own a home, what are some of the signs that they should probably give you a call, or they should be calling a heating and air professional? I mean, of course, electric bill, I know you said that, but I mean, there are other things that somebody should be looking at, hey, oh my goodness, this happened, or this doesn't look right, I should probably give somebody a call. I mean, are there certain things that you say? I know that you said something about the condensate pump. So does that leak, or what will happen when somebody knows that, hey, this is failing or there's a problem?
Yeah, so the obvious one is total breakdown. When they're left with no heat or air conditioning. Water leaks are a big deal and sometimes go ignored, unfortunately.
Sure.
Anytime you notice a condensate leak, you really need to call somebody to make sure that this doesn't become a source of property damage.
Sure.
To make sure that it isn't a long-term issue. In other words, don't ignore it.
Sure.
Because what we'll see is if a condensate line is ignored, it's being captured by a secondary drain pan. It'll ruin the cabinet of the air handler in no time. There's insulation inside of your indoor unit. It gets saturated, and then if it's not allowed to dry out at some point quickly, it's going to rust the cabinet out, and you could have an air handler that's 4 or 5 years old because the condensate leak was ignored. It's now ruined, and you've got to replace the entire thing. So that's a big one. I would say odors, noises, these are big ones. And then also experience with performance loss. You know the way your system used to operate. If you notice that there's diminished performance, it's not maintaining temperature now when it did then kind of situation, give somebody a call.
Sure. I guess too, and we see this a lot where people don't even look. But as the seasons change, and let's say, you experience some cold weather, it hasn't been cold, now all of a sudden it's cold, just simply looking at your thermostat and making sure that it's not going into auxiliary heat, or, making sure that it's not going into the backup heat prematurely or something. But then I guess it's important to have a relationship or a partnership with a reputable heating and air company, because then you can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, Eddie, is this right? Like, my system's doing this, is it right? But also, too, I've seen some of the units, some of the newer units will actually throw like an error code, almost like similar to a vehicle. They'll have some type of error, or they'll say like, hey, maintenance is required, or something is needed, or whatever. And sometimes it's a simple fix. Sometimes it's a more significant fix that they need to do. So I think that's one of the biggest things of why somebody should have a relationship and have a trusted partner when it comes to heating and air, because there are lots of things or signs, like you were saying, that you need to pick up the phone and you need to call, because it could prevent you from getting that $1,000 electric bill.
Absolutely.
Or all of a sudden you end up with a leak or whatever, and now you're having to do an insurance claim, or you're having to get a drywall guy out there to patch something, because a lot of these condensate lines, especially depending on where the unit is, we're seeing where they're spanning all the way across, the whole level of the house, and you get a leak and you don't realize it for a while. It could cause a mess.
Absolutely, and sometimes they're level.
Yeah,
You got to have pits to drain water, and unfortunately, once it's buried in insulation, we don't see that. So the only way we can ensure that it's clean is to do maintenance.
Sure.
Flush it out, but generally when they're level, they just like to grow slime,
Sure.
mold, sediment sometimes.
No, we've seen them pretty caked up where they've actually have to be blown out, and you actually see it's almost like a geyser coming out, of the house. So
pretty nasty looking stuff.
So, well, anything else that you would want to share, or how does somebody get in contact with HomeTeam to have you go out and do a service maintenance? What's the best way of reaching you guys?
So you can reach out to us a number of ways. You could reach out to us through Facebook. You could reach out to us through Google. You can go to our website. We have a contact form there. It's pretty easy to fill out. Or you can give us a call, 301-476-6010.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Eddie. I appreciate it. We're always looking for ways to help people protect their number one investment, which is their home. And we just see it so many times on the other side of it when we're helping somebody buy a home, that maintenance is neglected, and then it goes from what could be a very small fix, a couple $100 a year, having you guys go out and maintain it, to all of a sudden now it's a full system replacement. And sometimes that's the difference of being able to sell a property or not, is going out and making a huge investment into it. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.